Someone needs to click got it. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Cambridgeshire County Council's Children and Young People's Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everybody turns their phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will all leave the building by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble outside the far end of the building. To facilitate discussion today, I intend to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I will also allow members to speak more than once on an item if appropriate. However, please make sure that your contributions remain relevant and concise. Finally, I'd like to remind members, officers and public speakers that all virtual meetings will be broadcast live and a video recording of the meeting will be published on the Council's website. It's nice to see visitors here today. Welcome. First up, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies, please?
Apologies have been received from Councillor Atkins, who will be substituted by Councillor Coops, from Councillor Thompson, who is substituted by Councillor Nessinger, from Councillor Sharp, and from Flavio Vitesi, who is the co-opted member representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest today? Nope. So next up are the minutes from the committee meeting on the 1st of March. We're being asked to approve these minutes as an accurate record. If any member disagrees, would you please raise your hand now? Lovely. See no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as an accurate record, so we'll take that as carried unanimously. An updated action log was also included in the published papers. Are there any questions on the action log, or can we take it as noted today? Nope. Okay. So we'll take the action log as noted. Item 3. Item 3 is petitions and public questions. We've received 2 requests to speak in relation to item 5, the home to school transport to after school clubs for children with additional needs, which we will hear when we reach that item later on. No petitions have been received today. Item 4. Item 4 is the education transport contracts. Claire Buckingham, Strategic Education Place Planning Manager, is joining us live in the room rather than online today. Welcome. Claire, over to you.
Sorry, tell it's the first time, can't you? Afternoon, everybody. The Council Social Education Transport team, the SET team, operate about 1,200 routes, and each year it undertakes a procurement round for approximately 1/3 of these, ready for the new school year in September. SET are in the thick of the procurement round now, and the list of those routes being procured currently are set out in Appendix 1 of the paper before you. 150 mainstream and 300 special routes. The purpose of this paper is to seek committee's approval for the process for the letting of those special and mainstream school and child social care transport contracts in the current procurement round, and to approve the process for authorising the subsequent award of these contracts. In future, officers aim to bring an annual key decision report to this committee along the same lines as this report, preferably in January and no later than March each year. I'm joined by Martin Kemp, who is contracts manager in the SET team, in case any of you have technical questions relating to the procurement process.
Thank you. So we open this report to the committee for debate. Any questions, please? Councillor Hoy.
Not really a question, I suppose, just a comment on just following on from the comments made at full council, it just would be useful at some point to see the sum total of all the contracts we have, because we keep getting sort of these on an ad hoc basis, and I understand why, but we don't ever find out the true cost of all contracts. So that'd be just useful in decision making, really.
Okay.
I think that's all we have at the moment, Claire, if that's all right.
Yeah, fine. I've nothing more to add.
In which case we'll move to the report recommendations. Co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this item. So the committee is being asked to approve the letting of special and mainstream school and child social care transport contracts for the current procurement round. B, delegate authority to the Director for Education in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People Committee to finalise the subsequent award of those contracts, and C, to endorse the proposal for officers in future to bring an annual key decision report to the committee, setting out the transport contracts to be renewed in the coming year for committee approval. I've heard no objections. Are we happy to take those recommendations as carried unanimously? Yep, I'm seeing nods. Brilliant. Thank you both very much.
Yes, sorry, Councillor Hoy. I nodded and said yes. I think you probably didn't hear me in response, but we could put that information perhaps in the annual report that we bring in future. Yeah.
Item 5. Item 5 is the home to school transport to special school after school clubs. We've received 2 requests to speak on this item from Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson and from Nadia Bowes, a local resident. The committee will recall that the Mayor and Ms Bowes joined us in September 2021 when we last considered this issue to present a petition. A copy of the Mayor and Ms Bowes' comments have been published in advance of this meeting on the Council's website and circulated electronically to committee members for information. I will ask Stephanie Miller, Policy and Operations Manager, to present the report first, and we'll then hear the comments from the Mayor and Ms Bowes.
Hello, good afternoon. So in September 2021, the committee gave its approval for officers to undertake a fresh consultation for the existing home to school transport arrangements to the after school clubs offered at 5 of Cambridge's area special schools. These existing transport arrangements are part of the council's discretionary spend on home to school transport and have been in place since 2011. The cost of the 2021-2022 financial year for the arrangements for the 54 pupils currently in receipt of the support was £93,686. The fresh consultation took place on the 31st of January and between the 31st of January and the 11th of March, and it was agreed that it would be shared in a much broader audience. So it included all the schools with specialist provision attached, their staff, and also the families of the pupils who attend. The proposed options consulted upon were set out in section 2.3 of the report, and I should just quickly summarise those for you. Option 1A was to continue to provide the free transport to the pupils attending the after-school clubs at the Castle School, Granta School, Highfield Academy, Ely, Samuel Pepys and Spring Common Academy. Option 1B was to continue to provide the free transport to the pupils currently on roll at those schools, but not for pupils beginning from the start of the 22-23 academic year. Option 2 was to change from providing free transport to providing subsidised assistance with the parents and carers meeting part of the cost. Option 3 was similar to option 2, but with that subsidy being phased out over the course of 3 years, at which point the parents and carers would be responsible for all the cost of the travel arrangements. Option 4 was the change to providing only free transport for those families who met a qualifying low income criteria and offering subsidised transport for other pupils with parents and carers meeting part of the cost. The final option consulted upon was to cease the funding from September 2022, and this would mean the parents and carers would be responsible for making and funding their own transport arrangements. Whilst I won't go through all the detail of the responses, these can be found in Appendix B of the report. And of the 37 responses received, there was a clear majority who favoured the continuation of the arrangements set out in option 1A. Also, when parents and carers were asked whether or not their child would continue to be able to access the provision were the travel arrangements to cease, 65% of which responded they would not. So the responses clearly received clearly show the strength of feeling and the level of concern felt around the after-school opportunities for pupils with Scnd, and the part that these current transport arrangements are a part of that. Whilst a number of responses favoured a subsidised approach to the transport arrangements, there were concerns expressed about the affordability of this for families who are already facing increasing financial pressures. So the first recommendation to committee today is to continue with the existing discretionary arrangements with a further review in 12 months' time. Throughout this review, a key area of concern was the inequality of the transport arrangements only being offered to 5 of the area special schools and not other special schools. And in March 2022, officers undertook a survey of the after-school club provision at all Cambridgeshire special schools. And this survey found that only one additional special school, Meadowgate Academy, currently operates after-school club provision. Based on the pupil data provided by the school and of those currently accessing their provision, the cost of providing transport to those eligible pupils would be approximately £13,794 to £17,404 based on a year. So the second recommendation to committee today would be to address the inequity of the opportunity by extending the existing transport provision to other Cambridgeshire special schools offering similar after-school club provision. It should, however, be noted that whilst Meadowgate is currently the only additional special school currently operating after-school club provision, should other special schools opt to do so in the future, it would bring about additional potential cost implications. The third recommendation to committee is to note the feedback received from families and respondees from the consultation, which has been included in Appendix B. And the fourth and final recommendation to committee is to request officers further explore a means-tested approach in providing these travel arrangements. We are aware of the concerns raised by families about the affordability of this. However, a number of responses were in favour, and officers would like the opportunity to explore what this approach would look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Public speakers are heard in the order in which their request to speak was received. The Mayor is unable to join us in person today due to his mayoral duties, so I'll ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out his comments. Thanks, Scnd.
As the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, I'm pleased to see the report and recommendations from the County Council officers as laid out before you today. I wish to commend the officers for their hard work in undertaking the consultation and for showing a real understanding of the problem and a willingness to listen to the concerns of the large number of people who responded. I would like to acknowledge the campaigning and advocacy work of Nadia Bowes, along with her daughter Chloe, who are inspiring in their ability to highlight the importance of this transport service for a small but very important group of children in our community. I would also like to thank the thousands of people who signed the petition years ago, who also put the huge weight of public support behind Nadia's campaign. It is to the credit of the previous chair of the committee, Councillor Simon Bywater, who was willing to reconsider the decision to reduce the service and to continue its funding whilst this consultation was undertaken. The review of the proposals and a consultation with a willingness to listen to the children and their families means we are here today in a much more positive position. My personal involvement started a long time ago in my role as both Chloe's doctor and a local district councillor. However, now as a mayor, I acutely recognise the challenges we now have in local government with challenging and finite financial resources, but I trust you will do the right thing. In trying to make these proposals work for the children and their families, I'm keen to offer you the support of the combined authority in helping explore innovative, collaborative solutions to ensure that the provision of the transport service continues long into the future and it remains accessible and affordable to as many children as possible. The 3 C's are in action here. Thank you for showing your compassion. Thank you for your willingness to cooperate. And thank you for helping these children in your community.
Thank you. Ms. Bowes is also unable to attend, so once again we'll hear those comments read out. Thanks, Scnd.
I welcome and am very grateful for the recommendation to continue the after-school transport provision for a further 12 months. Currently, I think families with children with disabilities are incredibly anxious regarding the cost of living crisis and maintaining the already compromised quality of life for their children. It is well documented in research that poverty and disability are interlinked. While understandable that the local authority is wanting to consider means testing in the future, it may be fitting to investigate this further following the coming winter months, as I believe families' financial situations may change dramatically owing to the continued rising costs. While a rational idea going forward, I am not confident whether means testing and consequent contributions to transport from families will do much to lighten the costs to the local authority. On a side note, this consultation was carried out under the premise of equality. Your arguments of the transport for 54 children costing £1,734.93 per year per child may benefit from further analysis into how often a child uses the transportation service. This was not questioned during the consultation. For example, there will be a child that attends after school club once a week and others may attend 5 days a week. So your numbers may need further work.
Thank you. Before I open the report to the committee for debate, I'd just like one of the officers to respond to that query raised by Ms. Bowes about the annual cost per child, please. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the purpose of the £1,734 figure within the consultation was to provide an indicative average per pupil cost based on the current cost of the transport arrangements. And we certainly do accept that the further refinement of those costs, taking into factors such as frequency of travel to the provision, would need to be undertaken as part of any future work on this.
Thank you. I'll now open the debate to questions from the committee. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm just looking on the recommendations. There was a paper that went to Spokes and the committee paper is slightly different, and I just wondered why that was. On recommendation B, what went to Spokes was to approve the recommendation to address inequity and by extending the existing transport provision to all schools, and the recommendation that's now public is recommend to SNR to approve additional funding, and I just wondered why that change was made, please.
Yeah, that was made as a result of the budget setting and the role for SNR in that decision making. Obviously, we can make a recommendation to take forward to it, and that's essentially what your outcome would be today. But SNR will make that final decision about resource allocation in year. So that's the only change. It's not changed the outcome. It's just pointing it towards SNR to make that final decision, or to ratify the view of Children and Young People Committee.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Hoy?
Just to say that thanks for that clarification, and I very much hope that SNR would obviously support that. It was nice at Spokes to have support. Obviously, we made the point that it should be kind of all or nothing. It's not fair that it's some schools get it and some don't. It should be every school or no school. And thankfully, everyone on the Spokes was very supportive of that, which was very, very nice. So hopefully when it goes to SNR, it'll be a smooth sailing. Positive nods.
Definite nods here. Any further questions, anyone? Councillor King.
Thank you. It's, I think, more of a comment just to say thank you, Stephanie, and your team for doing the work on it so far. And we very much hope that in the next 12 months, we will continue the work and make sure that any kind of further consultation is possibly maybe given a longer time or whatever. We just need to make sure we build the right evidence for bringing that decision back to us in 12 months. But for now, we are very, very happy to support those families and the children to continue their after school clubs and additionally in Wisbech as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Because of the voting on this, we need to take each recommendation in turn. Co-opted members are eligible to vote on recommendations A and D, just to make life complicated for everybody today. So recommendation A, approve the recommendation to continue with existing discretionary after-school club transport arrangements with a further review in 12 months' time. All those in favour, please. That looks unanimous to me. Brilliant. Recommendation B, the recommendation that Strategy and Resources Committee approves the additional funding for the extension of existing transport provision to some special schools, after school clubs, to all Cambridgeshire special school clubs offering a similar after school club provision, please. Yep. Recommendation C is to note the feedback received as part of the consultation on the proposed options for future arrangements. This is for noting only, so no vote is required. And then recommendation D is to request officers further explore the option of a means tested approach to continuing the after school club transport arrangements. All those in favour, please. Marvellous. Thank you very much. Scnd, would you like to confirm?
The outcome for all the votes was unanimous, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, John. So item number 6. Item number 6 is the Caspy Policy Challenge Research Report on supporting care leavers' transition to independence. We're delighted to welcome 3 of the report's 5 authors who join us today. We have Eleanor Blake, Patrick McClary, and Ernestine Huey. Hopefully I've said those correctly. I'm crossing fingers. We're also joined by Nicola Curley, Director of Children's Services, who's been supporting this project. Nicola, if you could briefly introduce the covering officer report first, and then we'll hear from the report authors, but welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're just settling up. So this is a report, it's very loud. This is a report that has been a long time in coming to committee, and we do apologise for that. But that has been largely to do with situations with the pandemic and needing to make some adjustment to the original report when it arrived. The report itself is very long. I hope people have had time to have a look at it and has many recommendations. What we've tried to do, there'll be a helpful presentation in a minute from the researchers themselves, which will hopefully draw out the key issues for you. And then in my report, we have gone through the things that we think we can and should be doing in response to the recommendations. Some of them you'll see have already been through committee, particularly the council tax exemption, but there are other things that we can talk about today. But I think probably I'll hand over to the researchers, if that's okay, and then I'll take questions afterwards.
Hi everyone, thanks for having us today. We are here today to discuss some of the outcomes of a research report produced as part of the Cuspy Policy Challenges. I'm going to start by outlining our methods and aims before passing on to Ernestine and Ellie over here to discuss our recommendations in more detail. So while research for this report began in April 2020, bringing the report to committee was delayed by several factors largely beyond the researchers' control. Nonetheless, we strongly believe that the findings of the report remain relevant and the recommendations provide a path for supporting Cambridgeshire's young people with care experience. It is accepted in both research and policy contexts that care experience heightens the risk of experiencing worse life outcomes. Those with such experience are less likely to be in employment, education, or training, and they're more likely to face difficulties in financial, housing, and mental health contexts. Many young people leaving care cannot draw on resilient support networks. In its role as corporate parent, Cambridgeshire has a responsibility to provide their young people with the support that any good parent would bestow upon their own child. The recommendations of this report aim to help the council in fulfilling this duty. So in terms of the methods for our report, we started with a literature review on the broad research and policy context, with each researcher then going on to specialise on specific particular areas. We sought examples of best practice from other local authorities, considering the policies and approaches of relevant comparators, and good practice more generally to ground our recommendations in real-world examples and solutions. We engaged stakeholders in interviews and focus groups, and in line with the corporate parenting principles, we sought the perspectives of care experienced young people themselves. To this end, we utilised a pre-existing survey created and distributed by the Council and designed our own survey, which was independently verified by members of the Council and was approved by an ethics council at the University of Cambridge. Both of these surveys attracted a relatively small response rate, which is noted in the report. And while they're reflective of how some young people viewed their care journey, they are not reflective of all of Cambridge's care experienced young people and their views. Therefore, we also drew in a range of other survey material to canvass care experienced young people in England more generally. This broad approach informed our report, and in line with these, we focused on several interconnected themes that are vital for securing the transition into independence. These are accommodation, finances and employment, and mental health. In terms of what we wanted this report to do, we wanted to outline and bring together evidence for some of the barriers that care experienced young people face in their transition to adulthood. We wanted to provide solutions that improve outcomes for Cambridge's young people in line with the Council's own strategic priorities and corporate parenting responsibilities. And most importantly, we wanted to outline specific policy interventions that address barriers to independence. We wanted to adopt a solution-oriented and practical approach to the question statement, and this conditioned the nature and tone of our recommendations. We were determined to move beyond generalized recommendations, and we sought to provide real-world operational solutions and provide targeted support for these young people. It is important to state at this point, however, that there is room for flexibility in how policy responses to our recommendations can be formulated and implemented, and how they can be used to support extant initiatives. See, for instance, a recent decision by the Council to provide council tax support for their young people. This embraces the spirit and evidential basis of our recommendation, but amends the operational framework for the support mechanism itself. We encourage that our recommendations as a whole are approached in such a manner. And I'm now going to pass over to Ernestine to go through some of our recommendations.
So this is the recommendations for our accommodation section. So accommodation is commonly listed as one of the key areas of concern that young people have as they transition into independence. This is especially a problem in Cambridgeshire, where prices have increased by 30% in the last 10 years, which impacts those leaving care who have reduced options. Accommodation is a major area where local authorities support the young people. However, accommodation provision is an incredibly complex issue that is frequently subject to change. Therefore, our recommendations have suggested practical and structural changes. So on the structural side, care experienced young people find it difficult to secure private rent contracts. So we recommended that the council set up a pilot scheme where they can commit to acting as a rent guarantor for the young people when particular conditions are met. Due to its considerable complexities and the burden that accommodation responsibilities place on individual members of the leaving care team, such as personal advisors, as indicated by the blue box, we recommend that the establishment of a dedicated accommodation officer and/or team who can work with and feed information through personal advisors. This will facilitate a specific and sustained focus on this key issue, such models have been adopted in other two-tier councils as well. This also provides the infrastructure for pursuing other initiatives that will help secure the transition into independence. For instance, the integration of artificial intelligence for improving and maintaining relevant housing data. In terms of homelessness, young people leaving care are at a greater risk of homelessness than their peers. And unfortunately, this has been on the rise nationally and in Cambridgeshire since the report's completion. This point adds urgency to our recommendations that Cambridgeshire works with its district and city councils to stop applying intentional homelessness decisions to its young people, and that it secures purpose emergency accommodation for its young people who do experience homelessness and have no alternatives. Intentional homelessness decisions where the level of statutory support can be significantly reduced goes against the word and spirit of the corporate parenting principles. In terms of finance was the next area identified by our report as a key barrier for a successful transition. This issue affects young people leaving care in particular, as they need to be self-reliant at a much younger age than many of their peers. Our recommendations balance supporting young people with promoting financial resilience. In terms of council tax, we were pleased to hear that the evidence we provided for the council tax support has helped see a policy implemented, and it is also reassuring that the covering report states that it will be possible to develop protocols with district councils where the county councils pay the district councils directly, rather than the onerous process of refunding young people. We also recommended steps be taken to improve financial education, including a designated money and budgeting page in the local offer section of the website, signposting to financial services and relevant courses, as well as PDF containing information on financial benefits available to young people leaving care. We also recommended that relevant contacts and staff receive training on providing financial education and clear guidance on how to do so. I will now pass to Ellie for the employment and mental health sections.
So employment was another key area identified in our report, as this demographic of young people shows lower levels of engagement than their peers within the general population. 30% of these young people were classed as not in education, employment or training in Cambridgeshire in 2019, which has since jumped to 45% in the 2021 figures, higher than the national average. Barriers to these young people gaining employment include personal factors such as lower school attainment, lack of skills or information, loss of confidence due to previous failed engagement, and also structural factors like hiring behaviour. So we looked at steps to address this that the council could take to increase employability of their young people through development of internal work opportunities akin to a family business. So led by existing research and measures undertaken by other local authorities, we recommended the creation of ring-fenced apprenticeships, specifically for young people leaving care, or as part of a wider scheme, reserved places within a wider scheme, and or guaranteed interviews for jobs within the council where the young people meet the minimum requirements for the role. Caspy has also launched the Cusp Scholarship led by Ernestine and me, which has secured £1,600 to support the provision of work experience for Cambridgeshire's young people leaving care. Finally, mental health and well-being is an area of concern. According to research published by Bernardo's in 2017, 25% of this demographic experience a mental health crisis after leaving care. These young people have aspirations of stability and security, but poor mental health can act as a barrier to these aspirations. So ensuring access to mental health support is critical for ensuring a successful transition to independence for them. So our first key mental health recommendation was to improve signposting of mental health provision for care experienced young people by creating a clear guide on how mental health services can be accessed that centralizes this information and can act as a reference for both personal advisors and the young people themselves. Two of our next recommendations centered on improving specialist knowledge of mental health care internally. First, by implementing a comprehensive mental health training program for carers, personal advisors, and the leaving care team, for example, through the courses provided by Mental Health First Aid England. And secondly, we recommended the employment of a clinical mental health professional within the leaving care team, as already introduced by other local authorities. We were pleased to hear that the clinical offer has been updated since this report has been in the pipeline, but we do think there's still more room for focus on things that on the young people leaving care in particular. And finally, investment in and provision of mental health services goes beyond the county council level. And while we believe there is much that can be done at a council level, we also recommended lobbying at the national level. The question statement for our report tasked us with finding ways that the council can support its young people leaving care, and as such we recommended lobbying for dedicated services for this group. The covering report suggested a broader approach focused on lobbying for mental health services more generally, with young people leaving care being prioritised. We're really supportive of this. We would suggest focusing primarily on areas that the council can improve directly at this level. So innovative changes are needed to secure the transition of young people leaving care into resilient independence, and these changes are possible. This council voted to alleviate the strain that council tax placed on a successful transition, whereas a few years ago this was viewed as an impossible option. More can be done to enhance the mechanisms and initiatives by which the council helps its young people realise their potential, and we really hope that our report can contribute to this ongoing aim. We would really like to thank all of those who contributed to or supported this research project, and especially the young people leaving care, and thank you for listening to us today, and we welcome questions.
I'd like to echo your thanks to those who've contributed to the project, and obviously thank all three of you and Anna and Maria, who can't be with us today. Really interesting piece of work, and I know an awful lot has gone into this. I'm sorry it's taken quite so long, but I'm really pleased that you're here in person to have this discussion today. And we'll be looking to follow up with you on that Cusp Scholarship that you've managed to secure. That's brilliant news and additional work that you've managed to secure. We will now open this to questions. Your presentation will be circulated to people after this. I will try and direct questions either to you or to Nicola as appropriate. So starting with Councillor Doughton, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a really interesting report. I've got a very general question at first. The phrase corporate parenting has come up several times in the presentation. So I was wondering, the corporate parenting subcommittee, has the report already been to that? Have we had the comments? Have the comments been factored in from corporate parenting?
I think the report's been circulated to the members of corporate parenting, yes.
Right, okay, thank you. And then very specifically on the report, I'm very interested in the proposed training programme, which I think could be very, very good, very transformative, really. So a couple of aspects have been mentioned. As young people, what would you like to see in that training programme? I think I picked up mental health, financial skills. What else would you recommend would go into that training programme?
Hi there. In terms of our recommendations, and I will say that the person who specialized specifically on mental health was unable to attend today. We do think that focus, I think that in terms of our recommendations, we were envisaging, I suppose, almost different training programs. We think that one definitely needs to be directed specifically towards training the people that young people come into contact with dealing with mental health, with spotting mental health issues, and with alleviating crises when it comes. And I think that the covering report mentions that this is something that they may be looking into, which is, I'll pass over to Nicola about that then.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's important to remember about the time that the research was done, and this is one of the disadvantages of it coming at this stage, is that the service was in some redesign. So we didn't have personal advisors in quite the way that we do now, supporting our young people leaving care, but also the clinical service was also in a state of transition. So we do now have a very clear clinical offer, really good clinical service that offers support to our young people leaving care as well as our children in care. And there is a clear training offer around what is provided to personal advisors. We're very happy and it is a very helpful sort of second look at what we can and should be offering to staff. So we will continue to look at that, but we will put various aspects in. But certainly I think there's a bit around training for finance and employment, things like that. And that has already gone into the process. And we do have a specialist personal advisor that looks specifically at homelessness, housing issues. So we've already got that within the service. That has changed since the time of the report.
Okay, then just let me be absolutely clear. So as a result of this piece of research, you are able to look again at the training programme and to incorporate some of the recommendations from the research directly into the training programme.
So I think the recommendations around the kinds of things that staff need to know and need to have an awareness of in order to be able to support young people who are leaving care are kind of clear and straightforward, and I think, very useful. We know mental health issues have become even more, they were always significant for young people leaving care, but they have become much more to the forefront and of concern and issues, over the last couple of years. So a lot of work has gone into that, and the clinical service is entirely redesigned and offering a service in a completely different way. So yes, we are incorporating the ideas and the thoughts. Some of that was happening anyway, that's all I'm saying. So yes.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you. And Patrick, Helen, Ernestine, thank you so much for doing this piece of work and making us stop and think about certain aspects. I've got one fairly, hopefully, straightforward question to you. In your experience, you propose the term not to us to change the terminology and to refer to young people with care experience. In your kind of experience, does it work once it's taken tiny bit out of context, because there is ambiguity there, and it could be young people who were carers, for example, for their parents when they were young. So there's kind of piece there. And the second point I want to make, and clearly there's several parts to your research, and while the evidence on young people is limited because of the small number of respondents, the research you have done to especially provide comparison with what our other councils do is really really important and really kind of fundamental here. And I just want to say the recommendations around encouraging young people leaving care into employment and exploring how the council can consider internal opportunities for these people and how our HR department might support is something that from policy side and hopefully Nicola, you would support us. We would very much like to explore and take kind of one step further and see if we can do more than we currently do, and also looking forward to talking to you about the money you have secured to kind of help people in that space and how we can maximize the benefits. So thank you. So just a question about the care experience and if that's slightly open to interpretation.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments on just to address the employment things. We're really excited by the council's kind of keenness to engage in supporting young people in that way. On the terminology front, so we in the report, as you said, chose to use the term, terms surrounding young people leaving care. I think it's addressed in the covering report that that's something the council will be looking into, and we agree that this is something that should be done in consultation with the young people themselves. I think we do appreciate your point on the ambiguity of leaving care, perhaps as a term that might refer to young people who are carers themselves. Maybe care experienced young people could be something that could be considered as an alternative. But I think any sort of change in terminology that considers the views of the young people and kind of moves away from the current term of care leavers is something we would strongly support.
So sorry, just to add to that, there's actually an informal corporate parenting subcommittee meeting tomorrow. And one of the things I think would be very helpful is if we ask our Children Care Council and our care leaders, which is what they're called at the minute, to actually tell us what they'd like to be called. And I think that's probably the best way around. But that perhaps could be something that corporate parenting subcommittee take forward, because they will be meeting with young people tomorrow. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion to ask those young people exactly how they sort of see it. But yeah, I understand that lots of these things we use terminology for years and don't always question the origin or indeed how it feels for those who are covered in that terminology. Councillor Slatter, please.
Yes, sorry, I got stuck on the A14. Apologies to the committee and to our visitors that I came in late and made my colleague late as well. Yes, as you've obviously recognised, there are members of the corporate parenting subcommittee here. We have a previous chairman, in fact, who probably started the journey with you in Councillor Hay, and I'm the vice chair, and Councillor Boulat is already on it. So Nicola has already beat me to it in terms of, yes, we would want to be dealing with some of these things as soon as possible in the right way with the right people. And you were mentioning consulting the young people who are currently in our care, what they think, and obviously they'll come up with as many different answers as you might expect. I'm sure even with a small sample of 10, you were engaging with a very varied experience of care. And as we know, some young people go in and out of care, but sometimes that care experience, even if it was several years ago and has been built on since in other surroundings, can still leave an impression. What I was wanting to ask the researchers was how much you were able to engage with foster carers, particularly those who specialise, as you've talked in the staying put service and related service with younger people, and what their views were in terms of a special way of dealing with young people with experience of care, when we know that there is a balance to be struck between treating young people in care differently or the same as everybody else, so that they stand out only when it's useful to them that they stand out or are treated differently. Because I know that some foster carers say that the children really don't want to be labelled. They don't want to be cared for children or whatever. They just want to be like everybody else. And I would hope, and I know the chairman, vice chairman, the same. I would hope we are producing a good universal offer for young people. And it may be that we want to just make sure that they are being catered for within the general run. And I suspect that if we get things right for young people leaving care, we probably get it right for all young people. But some understanding maybe of whether they want to be identified or not. Did that come into your researches, or perhaps it wasn't anything you were concerned, in fact, you discovered?
Also having trouble with it now. Sorry, can I just ask for like clarification on the question?
You've been asking in several places here that young people with leaving care are treated specially in terms of housing and advice and so on. We obviously have many young people in the county we do look after. And I'm just wondering whether you had any insight from the interviews you had as to whether they're young people who really feel they should have been able to count on something over and above everybody else. It may well be that it is a good idea, and that's what I meant about getting it right for them, is getting it right for everybody. But it's just this idea of singling out or labeling, but Nicola may well have experience of this to insight.
At least from the experience of the responses we got, which were, as people have mentioned, we got 10 responses to our survey. Overall, I don't think there was an overall kind of understanding of a desire or a feeling of being kind of like singled out in terms of services. It was more just kind of relating personal experiences of where they felt like there should have been a degree of support and there wasn't. I don't think there was a sense that they wanted to be singled out over any other young people in a general sense. It was more just kind of discussing their own context, their lives, and how they needed support at various points in that. I think, do you guys think that roughly?
Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of our report centered on, of course, we talked about addressing the barriers. A lot of the things we came across were to do with a lot of the young people within the same age demographic would perhaps be receiving support from their families. And I think the way we approached it, not necessarily through the voices of, that this isn't something that necessarily came up with the voice of the young people, but from our perspective, it was what are the barriers and what are the steps that are taken by other local authorities to equalize the playing field rather than single them out, bring them, I suppose, up to the same level of support that their peers within the general population do receive.
And we kind of had a chance to speak to the young people themselves through outside of the survey through participation, so different charities. And I think the main thing that the young people told us themselves was that they wanted additional support. So they felt that they needed the same thing as parents would provide for other children, for themselves as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you, and I extend my congratulations as well to the research team and everyone who contributed. It's a big report, really interesting to have a full read of it and to see like the various aspects of it. So well done on the work. I was really pleased to see that many of the recommendations are already being looked at, and some of them have already been implemented. So notably the council tax relief scheme that was done this year. So I'm really happy that this can move forward. I had a couple of questions. One is more of a clarification question. So it does say on the covering the officer report before the full report that the council acts as a guarantor in certain circumstances for rent. So I was wondering if you can tell me a bit more about what are the examples. So under what circumstances the council is a guarantor for the rent, because I think it's a really important topic, especially in so many places in our county, especially the private rental market is so difficult for young people in general at the moment, let alone for people who are in even more difficult circumstances. So I was wondering what's the situation now, perhaps, because I'm not familiar with the detail on that. And then my substantive comment is around the no recourse to public funds comment. So there's a comment about the number of people who have no recourse to public funds when leaving care as attached to their visa conditions or leave condition. Well, of course, I know that the no recourse to public funds policy can't be changed locally. It's the government needs to hopefully, review that at some point. But I'm aware that this puts a lot of pressure now, especially in the context of the cost of living crisis. And we can see the impact of that policy on a lot of people who have that condition attached to their visa. So it does say in the report, I think in 2.15, that there's more detail that is further explored for this particular group of people who leave care and don't have no recourse to public funds. So I was wondering if there are any ideas in terms of what could be explored to further help this group of people who are disadvantaged in the situation. It does say that this group become eligible for housing benefit when they're granted leave to remain. So I was wondering if this applies to everyone, because I'm aware there are different types of leave to remain, and some do have access to housing and some have this no recourse to public funds. So again, it's more of a clarification question. More general question, do you think that the housing allowance cost for unaccompanied asylum seekers is sufficient at the moment, or is there more work to be done in that sense in terms of central government funding? And finally, I was just wondering if we engage at all with the all-party parliamentary group for no recourse to public funds, because I'm aware there do some events actually later in the year on accommodation and specifically around this issue. So I was wondering if the council has any link with that APPG in terms of bringing some of those local issues to the national level forums as well. So yeah, I'll just stop here. Thank you.
So I think those are questions for me, Councillor Bula. So I think, first of all, taking from the top, rent guarantor, it is based on individual need, really. We almost always do it for university. I'm trying to think of an example where we haven't, but generally we would sign those. We certainly very frequently look at out of area ones. So we tend to have less difficulty within Cambridgeshire. Obviously, we have a protocol, housing protocol with our district partners, and they're generally speaking very supportive and helpful. So that's less of an issue, but out of area it can be, and particularly if I think there were some examples in the report of young people becoming homeless and intentionally homeless, and then there's a gap. We will often cover that bit to make sure that they can be in some kind of accommodation and being supported. And then once they've had a period where they're able to show they're able to hold a tenancy without incident, we then will reapproach to try and get them a tenancy again, and quite often are successful with that. So it's those kinds of examples, but essentially if it's presented to me, I sign them off. If they're presented to me and there's a good case and a reason why, we would generally speaking do it. So it's not I don't think it's a particular problem that I'm aware of more recently, but we can certainly look into that. In terms of our young people who were unaccompanied asylum seekers, there is a grant that comes from central government that covers the essential support needs of those young people, and it has been increased in the last sort of 12 months, 18 months. So that is sufficient, and we pay accommodation costs. So we accept that these young people can't claim benefits, quite often aren't allowed to work in some circumstances as well. They're in very difficult situations. So the council will fund that. So there's no, if the rent's £10 more or £10 less, we pay the rent. So that isn't really being impacted. We are looking at some projects that we can take forward, because we do have there's a little bit of wiggle room with the money that's coming through. So we are looking at what projects we can look to try and support the wider group of our care leavers, because we do have a few more than some other areas, because we have a larger care leaver population. So we're doing that piece of work at the moment. And then yes, we do we get invited to those meetings, we do attend those meetings, and we have regional leads as well within Eastern Region, and they also advocate and talk about things that be helpful to government. That answers the question. Yeah.
Canon Reid, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the commissioning of the research. I'm struggling with this a little bit, because I thought that whilst it was very detailed and informative, it was a hard read. And it took me back to conversations we'd had on this committee back in 2019 with the previous Ofsted report. And it left me worrying about the extent to which we've made suitable progress since then. Of course, with all of the challenges we've had since. I think we're due another Ofsted imminently in this area, if I'm correct. And I'm just wondering, from the basis of governance, what happens next in terms of revisiting this on this committee to make sure we do get some rapid change if we think that the results are indicative of where we're at across all young people leaving care, not just those who responded, but also whether the researchers think that we are about to do enough to address the issues, given your experiences in talking to the young people.
Nicola, if you can take that first and then hand over. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So we had the benefit of a focus visit from Ofsted in, I'm going to lose it now, March, I think early March, which was a focus visit around children subject to child protection plans and children in need. So it didn't look specifically at this area. And I think, I mean, it's a published report, and I think people know that Ofsted were concerned about our staffing levels, but in terms of our general management and grip of services, I think they were satisfied that those were going well. This report is a little bit old now, and I think that's one of the things that's unhelpful for committee, and again I apologize for that. We have restructured significantly, so I think one of the problems in 2019 was that we had generalized teams that didn't have the expertise. This is a very specialist area. These are young people who have very variable experiences. So some young people have had very successful care histories, and I think we need to not forget that as well. Some of our young people do incredibly well in care and go to university, get degrees, go on and are very successful. Being in care is not a bad thing. It's often a really good thing for young people and children. And then other young people have got a lot of additional needs and continue to need a lot of support once they've left the care system. Personal advisors were not there weren't enough of them in the council historically. We were supported in increasing those numbers by this committee, in fact, and we now have very significant numbers of those. And we would say, we think that things have turned around significantly, and actually there is a much improved offer to our young people leaving care. I mean, we have 98% figures for keeping in touch. So that means that we continue to see and have contact with those young people, which is much higher than the national average. And I think that's an indication of how things have changed significantly. Caseloads for personal advisors have come down very much particularly in the last 12 months. And actually we have a much better, one of the slim benefits of the pandemic was the increase in virtual communication, and we have a much better virtual offer for young people who may be all over the country, in fact, and not necessarily locally. So we would say that things have improved significantly. This is a really helpful report. There's lots of detail in it, granular detail. People spent many hours, I hate to think how long you've spent on it, pulling together national information, national concerns and indicators, as well as some information from some of the young people. What I've tried to do in my report is also bring in what I know about our service and where we have moved, and things have changed over time. And I think we are in a strong position to take forward. We are taking forward a lot of the recommendations, or adapting them and taking them forward. There are some things where it's not practical to do so, and hopefully I've explained that, and the reasons for that in my report, but obviously I can expand if that'd be helpful for the committee.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I guess that's what I'm just trying to establish, is the difference between what's described, which would be not great reading in the context of an external regulator, in the context of the report and the felt experience, small target group, and our governance responsibilities to say, how do we know that we can be really clear that the improvements have been made, not just planned. I thought a very useful point was made about corporate parenting. I think obviously, clearly that's where the governance piece comes in. It's not a report that's been in front of the virtual school for looked after children, and I'm presuming that a lot of these things start quite early in secondary, not just at the cliff edge at the end. I am very aware of the amount of investment and the huge effort that's going in by officers and volunteers into really improving the life opportunities and advantaging these young people, not just treating equal, but actually advantaging them. But it is therefore a little worrying that we still do have a cliff edge. And those figures are in the context of not in education, employment or training, I think are something that would give us cause to require a report to come back to this committee relatively soon, just to get some better quantification of the improvement.
So I think we would all accept that our NEET figures, so are not in employment, education and training, are not where we would like them to be. We have done a lot of work on those. They were impacted very much by the pandemic, is the reality. We do have a NEET strategy. My understanding, but I may be wrong because obviously I haven't been throughout at this committee, is that what this committee decided to do was to remit that to the corporate parenting subcommittee to continue to review, because it is about children in care and care leavers. So there's a wider NEET strategy, which is for all children and young people in the county, but this particular aspect about vulnerable young people, it does get reported in, and there will be an updating report around the NEET strategy going to the corporate parenting subcommittee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nessinger, please.
Thank you very much. It follows on very much from what's just been said. And I think one of the points that I do think it's important to remember when this research is done, and that there's been a pandemic in between, and that means that quite a lot has changed in the interim. And I think it will be important to follow up on that. But I also think there's a really important point to be made in this report and in our response to this report around the support that we're giving, not just to care leavers, but to all young people who are sort of in the 21 or 19 to 25 age range, who are struggling with the transition to adulthood and need additional support. And I think as a council, we need to be making sure that we are helping our care leavers move into that adult support network, and helping all our young people move into that adult support network, and making sure that that adult support network is present. And I think there are quite a lot of questions about the number of, about how well we are supporting people more broadly across the county into employment. And as the current chair of the CYP Skills Committee, I'm very, very interested in that. But I think that we need to be making sure that we're looking at looked after children in the context of the broader population, and the support that's available, not just to them, but to everybody in that category. And while this report is extremely helpful in focusing attention very clearly on children, looked after young people, and we need to be making sure that we are looking at those young people, actually by the time they get to be 23, 24, 25, we need to be making sure that they are supported into the way in which they're going to be supported further on in life, and making sure that there is a transition, a gentle transition, because you can draw the cliff edge any way you like, but if you're making very, very specific arrangements for looked after children that are not going to be present for everybody else, then you'll get a cliff edge somewhere. So it's about that transition, and about making sure that we've got the right things in place, not just for those young people, but for any young people who are NEET, for example. And just to go back to the NEET point, as somebody who is also following those figures, not just for looked after children, but for all young people, I am very aware that the numbers are higher as a result of the pandemic, and that particularly numbers of apprenticeships dropped off a cliff shortly before and during the pandemic. And we need to be making sure that we're doing everything we can to get those numbers up again, and make sure that there is appropriate post-16 education that helps all of our children and young people into good employment. And that's something that is not just for looked after children, but for everyone across the county. I just thought that point was worth making. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Councillor Netzinger has said. Actually, when I was reading this report, I was thinking there were so many points in it that you could use for all young people, especially around the housing, because We've seen it's particularly, obviously, I hold the housing portfolio in Finland, and we often find that young people are kind of often at 16 being told they've got to leave home and then sort of being left to fend for themselves a little bit. And we are lucky that we've got some very good housing projects for young people in the area, but obviously they can only do so much. And I do worry that people almost become a little bit trapped in the system. So they kind of get in the system and they never are able to leave. And that's quite sad as well, that they're just there for the rest of their lives and can't ever sort of progress. So I think, yeah, it would be very interesting to look at how this applies to all young people.
Yeah, I think we would definitely sort of support the points you're both making about supporting young people more broadly. I think it is important to kind of keep in mind throughout this that I think likely part of the reason we were tasked with kind of looking into young people leaving care specifically is to do with this very specific corporate parenting responsibility that the council has to these young people, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, kind of these barriers that these young people face compared to their peers within the general population. And so I'd say we really appreciate kind of the steps being considered taken more widely, but I think it's something to just kind of keep in mind while considering those steps of, is there a need for these young people to have this further support to kind of equalize the playing field and sort of enact our corporate parenting responsibility to them? Just to add that to the point.
Just to follow up on Ellie's point, I also recognize the points you've made and completely agree with it in many ways, but in terms of the level of disparity we're talking about, for instance, in NEET figures, in Cambridgeshire in the last year, it's 45% of these young people. And just in terms of that statistical proportion, I think that in line with what Ellie was saying, that it's really due to specific focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think incorporating parenting responsibility struck me this week. I had a couple of phone calls from my daughter due to a lease issue, and I'm really aware that, you know, she has that support. She can make a phone call. So yeah, it's remembering those really important responsibilities, and thank you for bringing this to us. If there are no further comments, I think we'll move to the report recommendations. Co-opted members of the committee are not eligible to vote on this report. The committee is asked to A, note the content of the Caspy report and thank those involved for their extensive research. B, note and comment on the officer assessment of the research recommendations. And C, consider whether the chair of the committee should advocate at a national level for increased mental health support for young people leaving care. So I think we'll take recommendations A and B as noted, because we have done that. On recommendation C, I will ask for a show of hands on whether elected members of the committee would support me advocating at a national level for increased mental health support for young people leaving care. Show of hands, please. Absolutely a no-brainer, as Councillor Hoy put it. Thank you. I won't ask for those against because we don't need that. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your findings. You're very welcome to stay and watch the rest of the meeting if you're able, but if you do have to leave now, I completely understand. I assume graduation is done already or this summer? In an ideal world, I do apologise. I assume there's more writing up to go. Brilliant. And yeah, thank you very much for being with us today. A brief changeover, so I'll introduce the next item. Item 7. Item 7 is the Council's proposed response to the government's Scnd review green paper and an update on Scnd provision and placements in Cambridgeshire. Jonathan Lewis, Director of Education, is joining us to present this report. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do two papers which will describe huge fundamental change in education across our country. And you can tell by the amount of pages in the committee reports today. I'm very pleased to see you're all using your laptops, just how much information there is in this area, how complex it is. And we're going to probably start with the more complicated paper first, then go on to slightly more straightforward paper after that, around that reform agenda. So I'm hoping you found the summary useful. I will not be testing you on the 100 and however many pages there are of the Scnd green paper, but very happy to take any questions on it. First, starting off around Scnd. So this paper covers 3 areas. First, it looks at the green paper, the government's proposals. It's a consultation process around reform. I'm then going to move on to the sufficiency challenges that we faced, and then finally have a look at the current work we're doing with government around our funding challenges for Scnd. So they're under one banner, but they are 3 very distinct separate areas. So in terms of the green paper, this came out on the 29th of March. I think if you're not aware of the history, we had quite a fundamental change in Scnd policy, which kicked off in about 2014, went through until 2016, where we saw a shift from statements of special education needs to education, health and care plans, a requirement for all bodies to work cooperatively in terms of delivering SEN, and some reform in terms of the processes by which needs are assessed and considered. And I have to be clear, the Scnd review that's come through is very much an update, a review, a challenge around some of the unintended consequences, some of the benefits of that change that's come through as well, and seeks to really set an agenda for the next 5 to 10 years around Scnd and how we support Scnd across the education system. So in 2.5 of the report, I've sort of pulled out the key areas of the paper itself. Obviously, you can dip into it in some detail. There is a lot for the local authority to consider here. There is strengthening of our roles in some areas, particularly around excluded pupils, and our role around overseeing the system. There are some big changes for parents, an electronic education, health and care plan, which we very much welcome. But also a list of appropriate provision, as opposed to at the moment where there is an element of wide choice that may change as part of those processes, and also a lot more view on localism and how the local area contributes towards Scnd, and it's not just education or health or social care that have that role and responsibility. So I've simplified massively their huge document. What we've tried to do in the paper is actually give you a view on our response to the consultation. Again, this is something that is going to take us many months to do. So the consultation actually has been extended since I've written this report. So it's now closing on the 22nd of July. But what we've tried to do is give you our view on the responses to each of the questions from the local authority perspective. Very keen to get any input. It may not be in the meeting today because there is some incredible detail in here that you don't need to probably discuss around this table, but with a view that the local authority would do a response to the consultation. And I'm very keen to also share that with schools and stakeholders so they can see our interpretation of the government policy and changes. So lots of information, and apologies, it is so detailed, but we just felt for everyone to understand it would be a very sensible thing. And I'm strongly encouraging as many people as possibly can to respond, because this is a fundamental change in terms of what we do. Okay, I'll move on to the next section, which is around meeting demand for Scnd. And obviously we had a debate at the last CYP committee. There has obviously been a motion in full council that was supported around transport and provision for Scnd. So the report provides you an update on the key areas where we've secured additional provision. The further work we are doing to create more provision. There's an appendix attached to the report that lays out in some detail the further areas we are looking at in terms of demand, and we've given you some figures on the latest demand that's coming through. But I've also included in there some of the latest activity data that you may not have seen around our growth in numbers and the position. And again, the report has come out. There has been some national updates. So I'm going to draw you to 4.4 of the report, where it gives our position around new EHCPs that have been delivered and the growth. So in 4.4 and 4.5, it lays those positions out. The one thing I wanted to point out was that top of page 258, which is 4.5, it shows that we have had a reduction in the growth of new EHCPs. That's against the national position where they're going up. So I think the start of our strategy is having an impact in terms of that early intervention and supporting children in mainstream. And obviously, you know, that continued growth in numbers. I think we do have a challenge around the amount of EHCPs we maintain, and we have to continue to review that number. So just wanted to pull that level of need and challenge out. But as I said, in the report, I've included an update on the latest numbers and more details of the current programs that we've got going on, including new capital funding that will support that further provision being delivered. Section 5 of the report then covers the safety valve funding. This is the dialogue that we've commenced with the Department for Education. The report briefly outlines how this works in terms of discussions around our deficit that we have on our high needs block, which finished the year at 39.2 million. We had a very productive meeting with DfE officials on Friday, where we talked about our recovery plan, the processes, the governance we've got in place, the council's commitment to supporting a discussion around a plan for recovery, which you have seen elements of evolving as we speak in terms of our plan, but a very positive conversation with them about arriving at further support towards our deficit position with a view that they would look to conclude that in the early autumn. So a good positive first conversation, lots and lots of work to do over the summer, but a government recognition that there is additional resources that Cambridge needs. And we are on track in terms of looking at the transformation programs and activities that we're running. So I'm conscious that there could be a whole meeting on that single paper, but I'm happy to stop there and take any questions on anything I've covered.
Thank you, John. I guess my first question, and I've seen some of it myself, but I know that you're in and out of schools all the time. What's the school and parental response been so far to the green paper itself?
I think from both parents and school side, concern and worry. I think the paper, although being huge, lacks detail. It is also a consultation, so it's not clear what's going to happen. I think from school side, there is a real drive around what we call ordinary available provision. So the expectation of the minimum offer for SEND in schools. And I think schools are in very different places, both in terms of their capacity, their knowledge, their understanding, their finances to deliver that. And that's going to cause concern. So you'll read from the report, I did do a briefing with the maintained school heads, and it was good to explore and raise some of those issues and get some feedback for that. So they're clearly concerned about that expectation of them doing more in a context of hugely challenging situations more generally. In terms of parents, picked up less so in terms of challenges. I think I've mentioned already the presumption that we move towards a list of provision as opposed to parents being able to be flexible and look at other choices is significant, and we will work that through. We are working very closely on our response with our parent carer forum, Pinpoint, who are brilliant and have done a fantastic job engaging parents. They will help us inform our final response. So Tony Bailey is currently working with them very, very closely on some of the aspects around parents. And I think it's really important this committee, before it really gets into the detail of this, and we need to sign it off within a certain timescale. That date's now shifted, helpfully perhaps. We will need to make sure that we fully represent everyone that we work on behalf of. So I'm really keen to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you. John, just want to ask a question on the recommendations and the consultation vis-a-vis our Scnd transformation program. Are you expecting to change or redesign or potentially stop any work streams under the transformation program in the light of this consultation? Thanks.
I think that's a really good point, because if you remember back many reports ago, we talked about a banding system for identifying need and having that consistency across schools, and the national system suggests that too. We believe a lot of the transformation activity the government's promoting is quite some time away. We need to make some changes now. So we are not intending stopping any of our work streams. We think they're all needed. They will need a transition, but it will put us in a better place if we've got a good, consistent measure of children and their needs, and a language that's consistent. Moving to any national banding system would be much more appropriate. So no, we're not. We did ask the DfE for suggestions around other things we might want to do as part of the safety valve meeting, which will obviously feed into the green paper. But if you read the two, there is quite a correlation between what we were intending doing, particularly about supporting schools to be able to meet more needs. Remember, we've got 2.1 million from Schools Forum to support more training, areas such as that. That matches, I believe, the green paper. So although some things may conflict, we're very clear what we need to do, and we will talk to the DfE about that as we go through the process.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
I just trying to look something up to check my facts. Thank you. it is horribly coherent, I'm afraid, in your report and your introduction, because you almost wish it wasn't so bad in terms of the number of things that are coming together make life difficult for families and children. So we are where we are, and I honed in on page 249, right at the top. There's this bit about improving the workforce training. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only councillor who's come across residents or caseworkers come our way where people have moved into our area or moved around, and they suddenly find they're at a school without a Senko, more or less, or not one that really knows the job, and that makes such a tremendous difference. And I'm afraid there's this sort of, the parents talk amongst, oh, we've got a good one, yeah, oh, I wish we had, sort of thing. Now, it's obviously really, there's a lot of pressure on the schools, and I'm glad to hear you're in and out of them all the time. When we say more training, how does that get delivered? Does the county coordinate it? How much can we get the academies to take part? I date back to the days of the LEA, where you did know where you went for training, and you also knew people would check up on you. I'm a bit concerned that there might be schools that aren't offering the OAP as well as we would like, but we need to be able to help them, because you can't stop teachers leaving their jobs and doing, and therefore not being the good Senko that they lose. Thank you.
I think you make a very relevant point there, because SEN is a lot to do with leadership and that oversight and having the right people with the right skills in school. In the green paper, it makes reference to a new national professional qualifications. This is an MPQ. We have MPQH. We have MPQ for head teachers, middle leaders, other areas. We welcome this. This is an uplift to the existing arrangements. So there is existing Senko training which we facilitate and support. This will put SEN on a similar plane to those key leadership roles in school, which we welcome. I think my criticism, one of the criticisms I have of the green paper, is that there should probably be a recommendation that the Senko is part of the senior leadership team in the school as well, as a default, because then it puts it on that agenda. It's always part of the discussions. And the majority of schools do that, but I think there's more work to be done there. So we will make that representation back. I have a really effective team that do support Senkos in schools. We do have high turnover in this group. It's one of the biggest challenge groups that we have. They're working very effectively. We work on a regional basis across the district council. So we're trying to get support built and resilience in that area. They're having good impact, but it is a variability factor. We will look at this qualification when it's scoped and fully developed. We will decide whether there's more we need to do to build around that and offer more support. I think getting the qualification is great. I think it's sometimes the support and infrastructure that sits beyond that, as we know with teachers, how important those 2-3 years after qualification are. So that's something we will look at in some detail.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton, please.
Taking a cue from the previous paper, are we commissioning any research in this area? Should we be doing? Could we be doing? And second follow-up to that, are we looking at research that's been commissioned in the past?
In terms of, if you read the green paper and the list of references to research, it's throughout. And Councillor King's picked up our alignment in some ways of our transformation programme against the green paper. So evidence-based in this area is really, really key. We do a huge amount of work on research. So, I have to say, I don't know if you saw it over the weekend, our education psychology team was referenced in some of the national research around dyslexia and other areas such as that. So we have a really proud history of using research to support in these areas. And we'll continue to do so, although the drive to do the day job is proving more difficult to be able to find space and time to do that going forward. Again, as we move into the reform agenda, I think there are challenges and areas where we are weak, and my preference, and we've just redone the priorities for education, and research-based practice has to be at the heart of everything we do. So there is a commitment to doing that it is happening in pockets throughout the service, but we will continue to do that. It's absolutely essential.
Councillor Nessinger, please.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for a very well summarised report, John. There's a huge amount in here. I particularly want to follow up one of your comments, which was that you had a very constructive meeting with the heads of maintained schools about this, which is excellent news. But as everyone in this room will be aware, those are, I think, exclusively primary schools, and quite a lot of the issues with Scnd and EHCPs are in secondary schools. So I was just wondering how much you had managed to engage with the academies and the secondary school heads in particular. I think it's not in here what the proportion of primary to secondary EHCPs is, but I would imagine that it's that the majority of them are in secondaries, and at some point it would be interesting to have that number. I just wanted to make one other comment, and then I with luck won't have to come back again, which was on the turnover teachers and Senkos sometimes stopping being Senkos after a relatively short time. I think that my experience is that that's quite often because they go on to other forms of leadership. And actually that's a good news story, because people who have become Senkos, who then become heads and deputies, they take that knowledge with them, and it's very important that those people have that knowledge. But I think we probably all need to be aware that we have a shortage across the whole country and in Cambridgeshire of senior leaders in schools at all levels. So just keeping up the whole, we need to keep on training more and more Senkos, because they keep becoming heads and deputies. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean we need to keep training them. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Netziger. In terms of secondaries, I went to the Cambridgeshire Secondary Heads Association meeting the other day and presented the green paper. There is a session planned at their conference in June in person. It's the first meeting they've had since COVID in person, and we will be doing a workshop there on the green paper and the aspirations behind it. I've also agreed to run a governor training session. We'll do a wider Senko briefing on the green paper. I think we're trying to just get our thoughts really down to this is what we think it means, and then we will develop that further. I think the narrative we need to develop now is probably how the local authority will respond, what the transformation work means, and how that may affect what's going on in schools, and build some feedback and loops through that. But there's great engagement. Everyone wants to play a role in this and understand it, so that's going to be important. In terms of the balance between primary and secondary in terms of EHCPs, it's quite even actually. We've seen more growth in primary, it's come back. I can share, if it's helpful, a briefing note. We do a statutory return. We've got a nice presentation that lays out all the data we've got compared to previous years. Happy to circulate that to committee to give you a feel, and that's where I've extracted the two graphs from that you've seen there, so I can easily make that available to you if that's helpful, and I'm equally happy to do another briefing. Completely agree at Senkos. Yes, there is a throughput upwards through that role, and you know, I think it's a great qualification when a head's been a Senko previously, because it does bring that leadership at all levels through that role. But my worry is more about small schools where they don't necessarily have the capacity in the leadership team to shadow and have arrangements where you've got your sort of deputy Senko without designation, where people are learning as they go, and it stretches that more. But it's a revolving door. We need to do that, and you know, you quite rightly identify the challenges with leadership. We've got a number of schools at the moment without head teachers, and you know, we're struggling to recruit, and we're doing a huge amount of work to try and develop our people to come through and take those roles. So it's a real challenge at the moment.
Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, it was just, what confidence do we have after the finding by the Ombudsman about the child without provision? What kind of confidence do we have that there aren't other children like that out there? Because after council on Tuesday, I was contacted by a parent who says that they are in a similar situation, and their child has been out of school in, I won't say the area, but obviously somewhere in Finland for the last year. So do we think there's many other children like this out there? And if so, what can we do to stop that?
The case you refer to, we will be bringing that back to the committee in July to look at the learning from that. It's quite a specific issue around COVID provision and support there. I think the report is clear on, we know where the children are. We've laid out the need for that provision and those places in the report. And obviously we'd encourage parents, if they're concerned, to contact us. They will have a casework officer. You know, we're working really hard to make sure that provision is in place. I think the report shows the stresses and strains on the system. We're doing everything we can more investment, engagement with the government, working really closely on a transformation plan. And we want every child to be in school. Sometimes the specialist provision is difficult to come by, and I think even with all that provision, we're still going to have challenges regardless, and that's a national picture for it. But it's top of our agenda, and I think this committee is going to see a huge amount of reporting on SEN through that time. So I'd welcome the challenge, and clearly pick up any cases with us, and we'll happily look into them.
Thank you. I think that's everybody who wanted to speak. So if we move to the report recommendations, co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this item. So they are to A, note the report, and B, agree that officers should circulate a final draft consultation response to committee members for review. And then C, to delegate authority to the Director of Education to submit the Council's consultation response following consultation with CYP spokes in order to meet the deadline of 22nd of July. I think you said, I've got the 1st in the notes, so if we can amend that. Thank you, Scnd. Any votes against? Everyone in favour of that one? Seeing nods. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Item 8. John, if you can stay with us. Item 8 is the education white paper named Opportunity for All. If you can introduce this one for us, John, thank you.
Thank you. So page 371, if you're scrolling down like me very rapidly. So thank you. As explained, reform has come through. This is the first government white paper since 2016. For those of you less familiar, white papers are the aspirations set by government for education in this case. And the white paper brings together under sort of 4 headings the government's view on how education should develop. Now, what's quite interesting about this white paper is that it's a long-term plan. It goes beyond the current length of Parliament with lots of the measures and changes that are being proposed, but does set a very clear direction of travel for the government and its aspirations around reform, although certain areas such as curriculum are quite quiet in terms of their proposals here. So the report is covered under 4 key sections. The first section is around quality of teaching, and you'll see the very first point on 2.3 around the Scnd qualification. There is a clear overlap between the green paper and the white paper, and really you have to read both alongside each other to fully understand the reforms. But a clear recognition there from the government that we need more teachers. Councillor Netzinger has raised that. The need for supporting skills and development of skills in our workforce will remain a key challenge. And also the need to address some of the turnover and skill gaps that we may need to seek from abroad. I think, and I'll briefly cover our views on each of the sections. I think there is a real challenge around leadership, which we've already discussed, that isn't addressed in here, and there's very, very little on primary leadership, which is a concern to us because we think that's critical coming out of those areas. Chapter 2 covers more around, although it says high standards in the curriculum, there's relatively little on curriculum apart from developing some of the non-core subject areas, behaviour and attendance. There is the reintroduction, those of you that came to my training on assessment, the reintroduction of Key Stage 3 SATs is back. So we will have a new set of measures for judging the middle stage of a secondary school education, which is an interesting change, another digital assessment. Those remember that the times table test is on the first online test that we're doing. This will be the second. There's some changes around the school day, which I won't dwell on. You may have some questions on that. But the changes to attendance are quite significant, and I've just written to head teachers today around new rules on the local authorities' role with prosecution and oversight of the attendance system, including supporting parents that don't attend, and also the requirement on schools to publish an attendance policy for the first time. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement on challenges on attendance, with Ofsted playing a key role on that data. So I think it's an area we're very strong in as a local authority, do a huge amount of work on, but will be a key area for us going forward. I did mention curriculum. I just wanted to flag ongoing focus on modern foreign languages and music, which we welcome, as well as sport. So they're key areas that we think are important as part of a wider education. In terms of the third chapter, this is around supporting children. So a new terminology around parent pledge. This is schools committing when children are behind, that they very clearly articulate to parents how far behind they are, what they're doing about it, and what parents will expect to see different. I don't think any school in the county would not do that anyway, but it is formalising that approach through a new requirement. And again, Ofsted will play a role with that. But as I've mentioned to this committee previously, we're going to see catch up as one of our ongoing terminology as we go through that period. And there will be a requirement for schools to monitor and oversee that activity. And certainly in the autumn, we will bring in new results and we will start to look at the full impact of COVID for the first time with some national benchmarks. So I think there's some positive statements in there. We do welcome the Education Endowment Foundation, who are working with us on some of our disadvantaged schools and their ongoing investment into that area. I suspect the fourth chapter around the education system is going to be more important and probably more relevant in terms of questions from this committee. Government aspirations that all schools either are planning to join or have joined an academy trust by 2030. And certainly a tightening of the academy sector. I think we've had some comments already about, this feels different. I think the government recognises that. I think there are challenges in all schools and we probably need to recognise that too. But certainly over how academies engage in the local area, expectations on things like exclusions and management of attendance, working with parents are going to be much more formalised, and we will see a definition of what is a good academy trust coming out of this process too, which we welcome, and hopefully we'll be able to input from our experience in understanding what works and what doesn't work. And I think the other thing in here is a recognition that all academy trust should have a local governing body, which from your perspective as representing the community, I think that's a really positive and appropriate thing that happens going forward. There will be some more responsibilities for the local authority, so particularly around admissions. So in-year admissions will revert back to being run entirely by the local authority. At the moment, individual schools can do that if they're an academy trust. I think that helps the school place planning processes, and also things like off-rolling can be much more closely monitored than they can be at the moment. And there's also in the legislation, the proposals, and we don't know the detail of yet, the ability for local authorities to establish multi-academy trusts in areas where there are either not enough good trusts or there is a need to bring schools together to improve schools that are currently underperforming. So we wait to see with that. And I've given you some details there on that situation. And obviously at the moment, we are very closely monitoring what's going on and trying to see how this may come through. A couple of other bits I think are important to recognise. We are recognised in Cambridgeshire as one of the 24 priority areas for investment. You'll be aware we are an existing opportunity area that will be extended and will be now retermed as a priority area. But for the first time, the rest of Cambridgeshire is also included as well. So Huntingdonshire, Cambridge City, South Cambs will also form part of what's called the disadvantaged education investment areas. And I've again sent out information to schools today about bursaries available to teachers for subject areas where there are shortages. So chemists, computer teachers, maths and physicians are all going to become part of a bursary scheme that will provide a top up to those individual salaries to encourage them to work in disadvantaged schools. And every one of our schools is covered by that. Secondary schools is covered by definition and the way we work. So there is a huge amount in here again. The white paper is actually quite slim, and I suspect there will be a range of legislative tools that follow this. The Queen's speech had some of those in. I'll stop for questions and try and answer what I can, but we will probably bring both this and the green paper back on regular occurrences to update you, share with you, help me with some of the shaping of our education system in Cambridgeshire. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think my question would be the same again as to the response that you've seen from teachers and head teachers and CEOs, etc.
Yeah, well, obviously there's lots of different parties around the table. Again, we did a briefing with the maintained schools as part of those arrangements. We actually, and you were there, some of the interactive process that we went through, a huge commitment for the local authority to consider it's establishing its own mats if we wanted to, and that's obviously a helpful steer for us to look at and consider. I think my worry about all of this at the moment is that we should be focused in on COVID, the challenges our children face, the socioeconomic challenges that are out there at the moment. And I think a lot of leaders are thinking, I need to get on with that, and these things are changing around me. So I think we've got a really important role to play, working with Andrew and colleagues about bridging some of those gaps and explaining and making sure that they understand the right time to make decisions and who makes them. So we're going to be very busy with that area. Obviously, I've worked with the Multi-Academy Trust as well. They want to be part of the solution. They understand the need for a good mats. You know, they're quite interested in some of the more detailed work in here around particularly things like alternative provision and excluded children, and that's been a regular dialogue of the last few weeks. So I think it's early days. I think the problem with this is it's a bit conceptual, when the green paper is much more specific because there is a set of consultation around that. But obviously there is reference in here to one consultation that's happening at the moment around schools that have 2 requires improvement judgments. So that's something we are engaging with and we will respond to. But yeah, early days, I think.
Thank you. Any questions from committee? Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just touching on the admissions, would the criteria on, so the admissions would be coming back to the local authorities, so would the criteria be coming back? Would it be standardised? Because at the moment, criteria is different within different schools.
I think it's a very good point. What it says is that the responsibility for the administration of the admissions process returns to the local authority. There will still be own admissions authorities, so that an academy trust or the faith schools will have a set of criteria. There is a commitment to review those, though. I think we have every different type of admissions arrangements in Cambridgeshire about, is it a catchment school, the feed, or is it geographical locality? You know, where do pupils whose parents work in a school go? Do they top or the bottom? So there's a real mix out there, but the white paper does say they are going to review that. So don't know any more than that at the moment. We don't know whether we'll have a role around that. Obviously, we do get involved with consultations. Whether there's more of a standardisation, don't know yet, but there's a commitment to review.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Jonathan, can I just confirm what you said? The whole of Cambridge will now be classed as a disadvantaged area, and therefore subsequently, once this goes through the process, the government process, our teachers would be entitled, some teachers would be entitled to the retention payments as well, and that we would see an uplift in our funding then, obviously by definition. That's right across the board for Cambridgeshire?
Not quite our funding. What it opens up is for those teachers in any Cambridgeshire school that are in a subject area which has shortage, they will qualify for additional bursary. So they can apply. So what I've sent out today is the application form for those individual teachers. They can claim £3,000 a year for the next 3 to 4 years if they are newly qualified or recently qualified teachers, to retain them in our area. So it covers the whole of Cambridgeshire, but it is an individual person's allocation. So schools won't get more money. But
yeah, at the moment it's maths and science, isn't it, which is where they're concentrating on, as I understand.
Yeah, but it's been expanded, so it will cover computer science, physics as well. So it's a bigger area than it has been previously, but it is targeted at disadvantage. Clearly, not the whole of Cambridgeshire is not disadvantaged, but by virtue of the opportunity area moving to a priority area, they've expanded it for all our schools, which is great. You know, it's a real positive for us. So
good, thank you, Chair. Good.
Councillor Daunton, please.
Where are we? Page 376, 2.13. There's a sentence which mentions the establishment of new academically focused 16 to 19-year-old free schools. Are those your inverted commas, John, or is that a term that's used in the paper? And what do you understand it to be?
This has been pulled from the paper. You know, the government view that setting aspirations and having different types of provision will encourage young people to go through. I have to say, for Cambridgeshire, I'm not quite sure how this is going to fit with our existing landscape, because we have a university technical college, the science college down in the centre of Cambridge. We have a maths free school, 16 to 19 too. So I think the expectation that we will get any more of this type of revision is very, very unlikely, given there are only 3-4 maths schools nationally at the moment. We're now on that list. So I don't suspect that will come through, but that is a government's view that they will introduce wider 16 to 19 offer in a local area.
Okay, so the free school that's going to come to land north of Cherry Hinton, Teversham area, which is a humanities school, I think, is that correct term? Are you saying, do you think that we will see more of those?
So that school is a free school.
Yep.
It covers 11 to 16. I think it might be 18. I'm sorry, I haven't got the figures to hand.
I think 18 actually. Yeah.
The offer a school makes, if they want to focus on humanities, that's a specialism they can all have. This is slightly different. This is setting up a provision that is absolutely specialist in terms of its outcome. I'm desperately trying to think of another example of a specialist school, and I can only think of the maths school and the science technology schools. So that they're the only designated ones for that area. So I don't think it will change any of the existing provision. I'm not sure we're going to be required to set up any more. What I think would be good, though, is to take this spirit of difference at post-16 and work with the colleges. You know, we have a great college offer around the area with our sixth forms in schools and say, is there a differentiated offer we need here to get through? You know, I think particularly T levels that are coming through, what's our offer? How do they fit into this landscape? Maybe that's where the change will come, and maybe how we can leverage some resources might be through this route. So I think we need to consider that. And maybe, you know, obviously we brought you a post-16 report before, maybe we should bring an update to a future meeting when we get a chance to consider what this might mean.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you. John, we talked on the previous item, I think you mentioned in passing in terms of Senko and availability about like small schools. I just wonder if we sort of imagine ourselves head teacher and governors of a small schools, of which we have over 100, I think, in the county, what cumulative impact, what headlines do you think there would be, both as a result of the Scnd green paper and education white paper, and what we as local authority need to do to make sure that they don't run away in panic and resign? So thanks.
Yeah, I think you've picked up a concern there, and you know we are incredibly concerned with our small schools. So if I'm going to point that way, and I'd like to introduce Fran Cox, who's our new Assistant Director for School Place Planning and Education Capital, who's going to be leading with Andrew and others, taking forward that small school agenda to make sure what's in here is manageable, appropriate, works effectively through those routes. There's a lot in here that needs to be considered. And again, you know, we have met with our schools, lots of the small schools there. That meeting, you should have all come. It would have probably explained a lot of this. We did cover then how the local authority could aggregate the things it does to support them better, to mitigate some of the challenges that they're facing through this route. But it's really difficult to say at the moment the impact of any of these measures. You know, I think I've been maybe more specific on the green paper where expectations are higher. You know, the ability to meet different needs is going to be challenging for them. But again, that's how we work together. And I think, you know, we need to now put aside status and things like that. And it's about our schools and our children and making sure that where there's good practice or there's connectivity in a local area, that continues to develop. So Fran will obviously play a role with that. We'll bring that small schools paper back as it evolves. But I think we have to put our arms around that group because they're really important to us.
Thank you. Looking forward to the paper, Fran, and further discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome, Fran. Councillor Nethsinger, please.
I'll be very brief because I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappear in 5 minutes to go and attend another meeting. But John, I was just interested in the conversation, the conversation we just had about 16 to 19 provision, because Cambridgeshire, a huge amount of our 16 to 19 provision is not in schools, it's in FE colleges. And it's been a little bit of a frustration of mine, and I don't know whether it is of yours, how little control we have or influence we have over what our FE colleges do. I don't know whether there's anything in here that will allow us to have a greater role in influencing the way in which they offer places. I mean, lots of them do great things, but there's so much more that could be done.
There's nothing in the white paper that brings that out. There is an FE paper, which I have to admit I haven't read yet, that suggests some changes in that area. I will do that, and I'll happily brief you on those updates. I have to say, COVID has brought us together with our FE colleagues. So, you know, I have great relationships with all of them now, and we are, you know, my intention is to probably talk to them about what this means and work it through, because they are really critical. We do have a slightly different setup to any other part of the country almost, because we have the in school, we have the college, we have, you know, a very big tertiary college, as they used to be called, that covers that sector, and I think there's more work to be done on this, certainly in terms of the skills agenda, how we then feed them through the apprenticeships. We've got some work to do in adult education as well, so that's my intention. Now I've got staff to help me, will give me more time to go and look at that side of the business.
I'll look forward to the FE brief in that case. Councillor Hay, please.
Thank you, Chair. John, within the paper, it mentions East Cambs and Fenland being in a priority area, with the rest of Cambridgeshire being an education investment area. And schools and education investment area are eligible for a levelling up premium of up to £3,000 a year for 5 years. Now, within here, it also mentions a 40 million fund particularly for the priority areas, of which there's 24. Do we know how many schools are within those 24 areas and how that funding is going to be allocated? And from that, over what period of time that funding will be? And drilling down further, how much each of those schools will get?
Short answer is no, there's not been much announced on it so far. So the 24 education areas includes East Cambs and Fenland as one group, so they're one of the 24. Obviously, all our schools will benefit from that programme. My understanding, and I have been to the meetings, there's no formality with it yet, is there will be a funding allocation made to that area. There will be a range of projects decided on. So I've been to the meeting where we've talked about what our relative priorities are. So and I think Andrew was at that meeting as well. So things like reading, behaviour, attendance, all the things that we know are challenges. And at some point, I'm expecting it very soon, we will know the period and the amount of money that covers that. I think it will be 3 years, likely that will last for. Bear in mind, 40 million is a relatively small sum compared to the, you know, 7 million for each opportunity area that came previously. And it's obviously more areas, they've doubled the amount of areas as well. So I'm not expecting huge amounts of resources. What I welcome, though, is the coordination and oversight of key challenges in an area. I think that's what we need to continue to see through, and that's where, you know, our commitment will be to continue to support and play a role in that. I went along to that last meeting and presented all the data that we had around those areas and the gaps that are out there, with a view that, you know, let's work together and resolve it. So I'll update the committee when we have more information.
Canon Reid, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to welcome and thank John for what I think is going to be important, isn't it, is the slow, thoughtful, careful, context is everything approach that we take to what we're going to do. And I do think we have been here before, but I think there's education bills going through Parliament as we sit here today. So I think the intentionality of the change is absolute on this occasion. I really welcome engagement with the CEO network and the RSC, the new RSC. And I think it would be important, wouldn't it, not as a committee, not to make any presumptions about the perspectives that others may have in relation to the anxieties they've too got about place planning and affordability. Seems that a lot of what we've discussed today is the gap between expectation and affordability is going to dictate a lot of what we do. To that end, I just wanted to ask a question about a sentence on 2.14 on page, put his glasses on, 376, which is we remain committed to our family of schools remaining maintained. And I just would welcome perhaps us a little bit of a caution about appearing to take a side in the context of the rest of the paper being very clearly about context is everything. And I don't know if that is a policy position or whether that's a very specific relating comment to the removal of schools from double Ofsted RIs.
I think that was a statement around schools not rushing into this with their eyes closed. I think it's a recognition that there are options for schools to consider. And actually, there are some really positive things going on at the moment. So to make a decision now, when there's no aspirations till 2030 is probably where that comes from. I think probably the thinking is evolving around this area. I think this is where the committee do need to engage around models. You've clearly got a very important role to play because the faith schools represent a significant proportion of those going forward. I think that may also be a reflection of the timescales as well, and the fact things could change. But I think we're committed to doing the right thing, and that's probably what it should say, and making sure children at the heart of the decision that comes through. I think we're not into structures for the sake of structures. We're in it for the right outcomes, and that's what this should be about. So very happy to stand corrected. It's like the wording probably could have been slightly better there.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you. I think that's everyone. Yep. So we're asked to note and comment on the report and request any further information on the areas outlined, which I think we've done. John, I think you've got more homework. Apologies for that. The final report today is item number 9, the Children and Young People's Committee Agenda Plan, Training Plan and Committee Appointments. Before we begin, I'd like to offer my thanks and congratulations to Councillor Hay, who's recently been appointed to the fostering panel. This is a really important role and takes a significant time commitment, so I'm really grateful to her for taking this on. Scnd, would you take us through the decisions that are required from us today, please?
Thank you, Chair. The format of this report will be going to all of the policy and service committees at their first meeting after the annual meeting of council. So the committee is asked, as it usually does, to review its agenda plan and its training plan. Also to look afresh at the appointments to outside bodies, to internal advisory groups, including the appointment of the chair and vice chair of the corporate parenting subcommittee. And also to note local authority governor appointments and nominations. I think, Chair, perhaps if I could suggest if you wanted to work through the recommendations where there are vacancies and just see if any members want to pick up on those.
Yeah, I think that's fine. So co-opted members of the committee are not eligible to vote on this report. Recommendation A is the agenda plan. Any comments or questions on that? Councillor Slatter, please.
I think we've had a demonstration today how important it is for the corporate parenting subcommittee and the Children and Young People's Committee to be in good communication with one another, because we share, although the subcommittee is particularly focused on corporate parenting, we all share that responsibility throughout the council. And I think it is important that the whole committee and even beyond that get some more insight. So very much up to the officers in terms of what they might be able to do for us in that regard. There's certainly maybe some training in terms of briefings, the sort of thing that we now do. Those of us on the subcommittee are aware of, others may not be. And I should like to be able to bring to the committee, or the officers to bring to the committee, some of the excellent work that is being done around fostering, and no doubt with Councillor Hay here as an advocate and interpreter of some of that, because the recruitment and the retention of foster carers is absolutely vital. And there are some quite crucial decisions to be taken, and of course they're never free from budget considerations. So it would be good to see something coming up fairly soon whereby the parent committee is looking at foster care and the offer that we, the in-house carers particularly, who do such amazing work. Hope that'd be okay. I've got another one as well. And that is to do with Sacre. Not heard back from Council Account, but we still have a vacancy on Sacre. And I know it does seem to be a bit one of those things put in a corner and left to other people. But the education of the children in our schools in terms of religious education and world views is so crucial to our social cohesion, if you put it grandly, but basically understanding your neighbours and being better informed is so crucial. there is, for example, the agreed syllabus conference going on at the moment, reviewing the RE syllabuses for our schools. And I think it's important work to be aware of. I would like to see more people taking part directly, because it's a party political, it's a party balance. It is, the vacancy is a Conservative vacancy. Nobody else can fill it. I have been asked to remind them of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The second one is coming up later on in my list. And if we can certainly look at the training agenda going forward, I know that there was some really good training recently around some of these issues, but obviously the more informed we all can be, the better. Where was I? So taking the agenda plan as noted with those additions, recommendation B is to review the committee training plan at Appendix B. Any further comments on the committee training plan? Seeing shaking of heads. Recommendation C is to review the appointments to outside bodies which fall within this committee's remit as set out in Appendix C. There's one vacancy for a CYP representative on the Cambridgeshire Community Services NHS Foundation Trust Quarterly Liaison Group. We need a catchier name for that one, to sit alongside myself and Councillor King. This would be made by Adults and Health Committee, but if any member would like to put themselves forward either now or in the future, please do let me know and we can discuss that. I'll await emails. And recommendation D is to review the committee's appointments on internal advisory groups and panels. As mentioned, there's one vacancy on the Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education. The appointments are based on political proportionality, so this is a vacancy for a Conservative member. If any member would like to put themselves forward now or in the future, again, please do let me know. Recommendation E is to appoint the chair and the vice chair of the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee for 2022-23. I'd like to propose Councillor Anna Bradnam to continue in the role of chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor King. Are there any other nominations for that position, please? Nope. I shall take that as congratulations to Councillor Bradnam, then thank you. Children and Young People is also responsible for appointing the vice chair of the subcommittee from within its membership. I'd like to propose Councillor Slatter to continue as vice chair for 2022-23. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor King. Any further nominations for the vice chair? Take that as agreed. Congratulations, Councillor Slatter. And finally, the recommendation F invites us to note the local authority school governor nominations and appointments for spring term 2022 attached to Appendix 5 to the report. Are there any comments on these appointments or can we take them as noted? I'd like to offer my thanks to all of those who serve on governing bodies. I know it's a huge time commitment, but really important for our schools. Our next committee meeting is Tuesday, the 5th of July. Please do note this is at 10 a.m, not the usual 2 p.m. time. I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you all.